Good evening. Is it fair to say that Hamas's actions on the 7th of October has positively changed the narrative of the Palestinian cause and the way it's viewed by governments around the world and in Australia?
Maher.
Well, I'm not sure I would use the word positive, but what I would say about this is that the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, said something very telling, I thought, the other day. He said that there was peace on October the 6th. Now, on one level, that's palpable nonsense. The fact is that 2023 was, on the West Bank, which is not the place that is being bombarded now, was the most violent year since 2005, since the end of the Second Intifada, for Palestinians. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed. 80 children were killed on the West Bank in 2023. So it was a lethal year. There was no peace on October the 6th. So on one level, it's nonsense, as I said. But on another level, on the crude level of power and of the political and media class, the fact is that all those Palestinians dying wasn't news. It didn't ripple the surface. It didn't disturb the surface of the water. Hamas understood, for better or worse, what would create a disturbance, what would disturb the surface, and that was the death of large numbers of Israelis, and so that's what they did. They did something that couldn't be ignored, because the deaths of Israelis count, and the deaths of Arabs don't count. And they upended Israeli assumptions about the idea that the conflict could be managed. So they certainly created a situation where the Palestinians and their situation couldn't be ignored, but whether that was... And from that point of view, I suppose some Palestinians would say it's a positive thing. But I have to say, the price that the Palestinians have paid for the decision that Hamas made is so terribly high that I can't use the word positively.
Yeah, I was about to go to that because, I mean, Julian, the death toll for Palestinians has been incredibly high.
I was just going to add on that Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, had written this piece looking at the world that was supposed to go out in Foreign Affairs later in October. In it, he said, well, the Middle East is relatively stable, and now we can pivot over and to Asia, this long-desired pivot to confront China, and they had to edit that out after 7th of October so he wouldn't look completely blinded. But it is a blindness in the US policy class. They just do not see Palestinians. No. And until they started dying in such terrible numbers, the Palestinian deaths were invisible and it was seen as peace.
Yeah.
This is part of the issue, though, isn't it? That October the 7th, which was such a horrendous day for Israelis, the mass murder of, so many people, but those young people at that music festival are seared in my memory. People going out, young people to have a joyful experience in incredible numbers. It changed everything. It changed the psyche in Israel, and it's clearly changed the course of this war, right? It's made everything different. It is a definitive moment like I don't think I've seen in my lifetime in this war. So I suppose the question is, Hamas, in some ways, through all of this discussion we're having, is being rewarded, is it not, for changing the discourse?
In what way is it being rewarded?
That's the argument, that they are getting they are getting their issues debated like never before.
But they're not their issues. They don't belong to Hamas. They belong to the whole Palestinian people. The Hamas are the ones who are willing to fight and willing to attack and willing to kill people to make their point. But what I would say is, and this is, I mean this most sincerely, I hear people here say all lives matter, and I hear people say that they cringe and they recoil when they see the violence of the Israeli state in Gaza. But I have to say, I don't hear anybody who's willing to stand up and fight for the Palestinians. I don't hear anybody who's willing to put their political or their economic credentials on the line to save Palestinian lives. If you leave a vacuum where you're not fighting for the Palestinians, yes, Hamas are going to fill that vacuum every single day of the week. And that's the tragedy. The tragedy is that you have left the field as an international community to Hamas. If you don't want Hamas in the centre of the field, take the centre of the field. Fight for the Palestinians.
A powerfully expressed point. I could see you trying to get in there.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of change and possible changes of the narrative, I cannot believe that it was all the talk about what is going on. We're still conflating Hamas and Palestinian civilians, which is kind of logical fallacy that is deployed by purposefully, I imagine, by governments whenever they need to make this point. So I think if we are still not distinguishing between Hamas and Palestinian civilians, and also between Israeli state, the state of Israel, and Jewish people elsewhere, and then every criticism of Jewish states suddenly becomes anti-Semitism, as if we forget that there are so many Jewish people, including myself, who do not support what the state of Israel is doing. Then, so even if we are still committing so easily this very simple logical mistake, I don't know if the narrative has really improved.
The point about the conflation of, the government or the structure with the people is a very important point, I think, Deborah, because that has happened as we're having our own debates here, very way, but about our views on the war and the way that we should express them. There has been kind of motive put on people based on their cultural or religious backgrounds. How do you reflect on the way we're having those debates?
Well, October last year was a devastating month around the world and here at home. I was standing on stage in Melbourne on October the 14th when the nation decided that First Nations people would not have a voice to Parliament in this country. I kind of thought that that was going to be the result. I didn't hold out much hope. But 65%, that was really devastating. Instantly, it became apparent that there would be no more discourse about this matter, that everything turned towards the conflict overseas. And it's not that the two should be mutually exclusive, but almost instantly, and quite typically, I would say, of the Australian population, not ever one to look inward and to examine the contents of its own character, looking outwards and pouring a sort of confused hatred into one side or the other with such ugliness, you would think that we were living in the Northern Hemisphere. It's not that we shouldn't pay attention, it's not that we shouldn't be informed, but it's almost as if we cannot look at our own crimes against humanity here. And there'll be those who'll rush to their keyboards right now to shoot me down in flames, but I'm not talking just about First Nations people in this country, I'm talking about everybody. Everybody who came here since 1788. Because what diminishes First Nations people in this land diminishes us all. Yes. And the fact that Australians have struggled to understand that is being lived out on the streets right now with people who are protesting with very little information, I would say, on occasion. There are those who are informed and there are those who are jumping to a set of conclusions that if they were asked to explain what's actually going on and the history of this space that is being contested and those lives that have been lost in that space, they wouldn't be able to explain it to you.